Welcome to Cinque Terre, Italy, one of the most romanticised stretches of coastline on the planet. Translating to the five lands, this rugged, isolated portion of the Italian Riviera was once a string of forgotten maritime outposts. Today, we are visiting all five of these breathtaking villages to see exactly how they evolved into a global phenomenon. We begin our journey in Vernazza. As we stroll through the lively, bustling corridors of this village, it is important to understand that Vernazza has historically been the wealthiest and most powerful of the five lands. To understand Vernazza's provenance, we have to look to the sea. Unlike the other villages, which were largely agricultural communities that happened to be near the water, Vernazza was fundamentally a maritime settlement. Records of its existence date back to the year 1080. It was the only village with a proper natural harbour, which made it a critical strategic asset for the Republic of Genoa. The Genoese used Vernazza as a naval base to defend this stretch of the coast against Saracen pirates. That military history is still baked into the stones here. The remnants of fortified walls and lookout towers speak to a time when the sea brought danger just as often as it brought food.
I think I nodded it. You want to go this way? No. That way. You go. Go that way.
At the very edge of the harbour sits the heart of the village's spiritual life. Rather than being tucked away in a quiet square, Vernazza's main church was built directly on the water, its foundations literally battered by the winter waves. It is a profound statement about where the community's priorities lay. The sea gave them their power, their wealth, and their food. But it could also take their lives in a storm. Placing their spiritual anchor right on the shoreline was a way of blessing the waters and protecting the sailors. Today, that same sea brings a different kind of fleet, tourists. Vernazza is arguably the most fiercely sought after destination in the Cinque Terre. The influx of global tourism has transformed the ground floors of these ancient fishermen's homes into a gauntlet of gelato shops, boutique hotels and seafood restaurants. Yet, the soul of Vernazza remains incredibly resilient. The cultural identity of this village is rooted in survival. In 2011, this town was nearly wiped off the map by a devastating flash flood that buried the lower village in mud and debris. The fact that Vernazza rebuilt itself so quickly, relying on the sheer grit of its local population, tells you everything you need to know about the people here. They are deeply tethered to this land. As we walk through this village, feeling the cool Mediterranean breeze, we are walking through a living monument to maritime endurance.
Turisti, Madonna.
But to truly understand Vernazza, you have to look past the harbour and tilt your gaze upward. Notice the architectural style of the buildings framing the village. These are the traditional Ligurian tower houses. They were built tall, narrow, and tightly packed together, not just to maximise the limited space in this narrow valley, but as a deliberate defensive strategy. If pirates breached the harbour, the labyrinth of impossibly tight alleyways acted as a bottleneck, allowing the locals to defend their homes from the higher windows. The pastel pinks, ochres, and reds we see today are beautiful. Yes, but historically, they served a highly practical purpose. They allowed fishermen to spot their exact homes through the fog and sea spray from miles offshore.
Ah, on n'y a même pas pensé. Ah, je pense qu'on aurait pas été fait pour ça.
While Vernazza was a naval and maritime giant, its people were still subjected to the brutal geography of the Cinque Terre. Look at the immense green amphitheatre of terraced hills surrounding the town. Even with their wealth coming from the sea, the locals spent centuries carving dry stone walls into the cliffs to cultivate olives and grapes. It represents a staggering duality. The men of Vernazza were historically divided between battling the unpredictable Mediterranean and taming the unforgiving, vertical earth. Today, that agrarian and fishing lifestyle has largely transitioned into a performance of cultural heritage. The small wooden boats you see bobbing in the harbour are still used by locals, but the village's economy is now entirely dependent on the thousands of visitors who arrive daily. This creates a fascinating, sometimes tense, social dynamic. Vernazza is essentially a village of just a few hundred permanent residents, tasked with hosting the world. In the winter, when the ferries stop running and the restaurants board up their windows, the village reverts to its quiet, isolated self, returning to the locals who reclaim their communal spaces. As we pause to take in the atmosphere of the village, you can still feel that undeniable pulse of history. Yes, the experience must be shared with crowds. And yes, the ancient fishermen's storerooms now cater to modern travellers. But the essence of Vernazza hasn't been lost. It is a village that has survived pirates, isolation, devastating floods, and modern mass tourism, all while maintaining its proud, unbreakable connection to the Ligurian Sea. We have made the short hop over to Manarola. If you have ever seen a postcard, a puzzle, or a screensaver of the Cinque Terre, there is a very high chance it was a picture of this exact town. Manarola is widely considered to be the oldest of the 5 villages, with its cornerstone laid around the early 14th century. As we walk down the main drag toward the marina, notice how the town is essentially built into a steep, narrow ravine. The main street actually sits right on top of the local creek, which was covered over years ago to create this walkway. The vibe here feels just a bit more romantic, a bit more relaxed than Vernazza. While Vernazza had that bustling natural harbour, Manarola doesn't really have a beach. Instead, it has this incredibly dramatic rocky cove. Look at how the locals have essentially parked their small boats right on the street because the ocean gets so rough in the winter and there is no protective harbour. They actually use winches to haul their boats up out of the water and leave them sitting here in the plaza. It is such a fascinating cultural quirk of life on this rugged coast.
Ma no, ma 20-25 è tanto, un quarto d'ora ci ha fatto.
Sta cambiando. Ah, scusami.
Beyond its postcard-perfect views, Manarola holds a profound historical legacy as the oldest of the Cinque Terre villages. Its very name hints at its ancient roots. Some historians believe Manarola evolved from the Latin magna rota, meaning large wheel, a nod to the historic watermills that once powered the town. Others suggest a more mystical origin, Manium Arula, translating to a small temple dedicated to the Roman household gods, the Mani. Whatever the true origin, the town's cornerstone is undeniable. The beautiful church of San Lorenzo, standing watch near the top of the village, was built by the locals all the way back in 1338. Anchoring the community's spiritual life for nearly 7 centuries.
He isn't getting out yet.
Getting right down by the sea, you are immediately enveloped by the sensory power of the Ligurian coast. You can hear the deep echoing rhythm of the water relentlessly hitting the dark, jagged rocks, sending a fine, refreshing mist of salt spray into the air. The water here is a piercing, crystal clear azure, offering such incredible visibility that you can often spot schools of small silver fish darting above the uneven seabed and sea urchins clinging safely to the submerged stones. Because Manarola completely lacks a traditional sandy beach, this natural rocky cove transforms into an impromptu, highly energetic swimming pool during the sweltering summer heat. Sunbathers sprawl out like lizards across every available flat surface of the giant boulders, making the absolute most of the Mediterranean sun. You will watch locals and adventurous travellers alike taking flying leaps directly from the cliff edges into the deep, cooling depths below. It is a thrilling, beautifully raw way to experience the sea, made complete by the sturdy metal ladders bolted directly into the rock face to help swimmers haul themselves back up for another dive. We are going to leave the water's edge and take the paved walkway heading up the cliffside. If you have ever seen a postcard, a puzzle, or a screensaver of the Cinque Terre, there is a very high chance it was taken right along this path. And here is the reward for our climb. Looking back from the top of the point, the view of Manarola is nothing short of gravity-defying. The pastel houses cling to the dark cliffside like a brilliantly coloured mosaic. Historically, these vibrant shades of pink, yellow, and orange weren't just for aesthetics. They were painted brightly so that fishermen could easily spot their own homes through the thick coastal fog as they sailed back from a long day at sea.
That way. It looked like it was farther than that, but it's hard to tell if that's good.
Debemos subir.
As we climb, we pass right by the famous cliffside restaurant terraces. We won't stop in today, but just walking by, you can catch the scent of fresh basil on the breeze. Liguria is the undisputed birthplace of pesto, and dining with a view like this, listening to the clinking of wine glasses, is a quintessential Italian Riviera experience.
No.
Take a moment to look past the houses, up to the impossibly steep hills surrounding the village. Every single inch is carved into vine terraces. This town is world famous for its sweet dessert wine called Cinque Terre. Cultivating grapes here is known as heroic viticulture. It is so incredibly steep that they use a monorail system, a little motorized cart on a single track just to transport the grapes down during the autumn harvest. It is a testament to centuries of human resilience, carving a living out of solid rock. As we take one last look at Manarola glimmering against the dark Ligurian Sea, it is easy to understand why this ancient village captures so many hearts. It is a place where sheer human willpower perfectly intertwines with staggering natural beauty, preserving a way of life that has survived for centuries. But our journey down this legendary coastline isn't quite finished. Leaving these historic terraces behind, we head just a short distance south to the next chapter of our story, the vibrant, dramatic and southernmost village of the 5 Riomaggiore. The origins of Riomaggiore are steeped in a blend of history and legend. Local lore suggests the village was founded in the 8th century by Greek refugees fleeing persecution from the Byzantine Empire. They supposedly hid high in the mountains, out of sight of the sea. It wasn't until the 13th century when the Republic of Genoa offered protection against marauding Saracen pirates that the villagers finally felt safe enough to migrate down into the coastal gorge. Whether myth or fact, it underscores the primary historical function of Riomaggiore. It was a place to hide. The architecture here is born of pure survival. The towering vertical houses built up to 4 or 5 stories high, because there was simply nowhere else to expand within the narrow ravine, stand as a monument to human adaptation. Notice the vibrant Genoese pastel colours. These weren't painted for tourists. They were painted so returning fishermen could spot their specific homes through the dense sea fog. Even more fascinating is their dual entry design. Many houses have a front door on one street level and a back door on a higher street. A clever architectural trick designed to allow a quick escape in case of pirate raids or sudden flash floods. For hundreds of years, Riomaggiore was effectively cut off from the rest of the world, before the railway was blasted through the cliffs in the late 19th century. The only way to reach this village was by a treacherous boat ride or a grueling hike over the mountains. This intense isolation incubated a highly distinct culture. The local dialect spoken here is completely different from the other villages. It also forced the locals to become master agricultural engineers. They carved thousands of miles of dry stone walls, called mascia, into the sheer cliff faces to plant vines. That requires such backbreaking vertical labour to harvest that locals call it heroic viticulture. Today, Riomaggiore serves as a massive funnel for tourism, largely because it is the closest village to the major transit hub of La Spezia. It is also famous as the starting point of the Via dell'Amore, the path of love. Interestingly, this romantic pilgrimage site was never meant for lovers at all. It was carved out in the 1920s by railway workers who needed a safe path between Riomaggiore and Manarola to store explosives. Only later did it become a quiet meeting place for young lovers from the two historically isolated towns. Underneath the bustling tourist facade, the soul of Riomaggiore remains intact. It is a community that took stone, fog, and solitude and carved out a masterpiece.
You want to give you a flyer, maybe I can save your day. Otherwise, enjoy the ferry. Quindi enjoy the ferry adesso.
That deep-seated defensive posture eventually gave way to artistic fascination. Long before the era of smartphones and social media, Riomaggiore captured the imagination of the 19th century Italian painter Telemaco Signorini. His famous depictions of these narrow, sun-drenched staircases and the daily lives of the locals helped introduce the rugged beauty of the Cinque Terre to the outside world. It was an early precursor to the visual obsession that drives modern tourism today. Yet, even with its global fame, the physical reality of living here remains fiercely demanding. The village is surrounded by fragrant Mediterranean, scrub and steep terraced vineyards that require constant, meticulous maintenance. For generations, the wealth of Riomaggiore didn't come from the sea, but from the incredibly arduous cultivation of grapes and olives on slopes that seem to defy gravity. Culturally, the people here are just as much a mountain people as they are a coastal people. Today, you can observe the fascinating friction between that ancient agricultural soul and the modern tourist economy. The ground floors that once stored heavy wooden wine barrels and fishing nets now serve as vibrant cafes and boutiques. Yet, the iconic sight of laundry strung across the narrow alleys remains a staple, flapping in the breeze high above the heads of passing travellers. It is a striking visual reminder that amid the holiday atmosphere, this is still a functioning, living community. It is a village that honours its isolated, resilient past, while gracefully acting as the welcoming southern gateway to the Five Lands.
A mí me sale por acá, por acá, y así nos vamos por la calle. 7 minutos.
Leaving the intense claustrophobic ravines of the southern villages behind, we arrive at our fourth stop, Monterosso al Mare. The shift in atmosphere here is instant, undeniable, and physically relieving. As you take in this wide open promenade, you immediately understand that Monterosso is the absolute outlier of the Cinque Terre. It is expansive, relatively flat, and defined by a sweeping, horizon-stretching sandy coastline that simply doesn't exist anywhere else in the Five Lands. Historically, Monterosso's provenance is entirely tied to this accessibility, because its topography wasn't as hostile or hidden as the other four villages. It was much easier for early civilizations to settle and consequently, significantly easier for enemies to attack. Throughout the Middle Ages, the Republic of Genoa heavily relied on Monterosso as a vital maritime stronghold. But that meant the village was constantly in the crosshairs of brutal Saracen and Turkish pirate raids. The most infamous of these occurred in the 16th century under the fearsome pirate Dragut, who devastated the town. This terrifying vulnerability forced the village to develop a massive defensive infrastructure. At its peak, 13 distinct stone watchtowers guarded this settlement, connected by thick defensive walls and an imposing clifftop fortress. Today, the remnants of that military past, such as the iconic Aurora Tower, still cast long, silent shadows over the vibrant rows of modern beach umbrellas. It is a stunning visual paradox, a landscape built for war that has transformed into a sanctuary of leisure. But Monterosso's true historical footprint, the one that shaped its modern identity, lies in its rapid evolution over the last century and a half. Long before international backpackers or social media influencers discovered the Cinque Terre, this village was already a beloved, exclusive retreat for the Italian elite. When the railway finally blasted through these mountains in the 1870s, Monterosso was the only village with enough flat land to accommodate a massive train station right on the water.
That's fair.
Overnight, wealthy families from Milan and Genoa began arriving. They built grand, beautiful Art Nouveau villas along the seafront, fundamentally changing the architecture and the economy of the town.
Yeah.
This was like, there was only 4 other jewelers.
Because of its accessible beaches, Monterosso embraced the concept of modern leisure tourism decades earlier than its neighbours. It became a hub of intellectual and artistic life. The Nobel Prize-winning poet Eugenio Montale spent his childhood summers here, famously drawing deep inspiration from what he described as the rocky and austere landscape, baked by the relentless Mediterranean sun. What makes Monterosso so fascinating to explore today is its stark, split personality. It is quite literally severed into 2 distinct halves by a massive rocky promontory known as the San Cristoforo Hill. High atop this hill sits a 17th century Cappuccini monastery. For centuries, the monks up there served as the spiritual and agricultural anchors of the village, quietly overlooking the chaos of the coast.
Good.
I didn't need to clean my cup.
Yeah, that's what we're talking about.
I'm not doing this.
Yeah.
No, no.
We are currently walking through the Paese Vecchio, the ancient medieval centre. Here, you are deeply immersed in the traditional soul of the Cinque Terre, surrounded by a labyrinth of narrow Carugi alleyways, ancient striped marble churches, and brightly painted facades tightly stacked upon one another.
Non li sopporto più, non sopporto più i bianchi, non mi voglio far più. Lasciarli andare contro i bianchi.
I don't know, maybe.
Oh, tree difference. Oh, okay. What is that flower?
This stepped pathway winds its way up and over the massive bedrock of the San Cristoforo hill that divides the town. It is a bit of a climb, taking us right past the 17th century Cappuccini monastery that has watched over these waters for hundreds of years. As we crest the hill near the statue of St. Francis and begin our descent down the northern side, the landscape dramatically opens up before us. We are entering the Fagina, the new town. Suddenly, the ancient, cramped world falls away, expanding into a modern resort area, built heavily in the 20th century for comfort, easy transit, and beachside luxury. This wide open promenade and sweeping sandy beach show you exactly why Monterosso became the ultimate coastal retreat. The rhythm of life here is deeply seasonal. In the peak of summer, Monterosso swells to bursting, acting as the primary host for the region's tourism. But in the winter, when the umbrellas are packed away and the savage sea storms roll in, battering the promenade, the village returns to the locals. It is in these quiet months that you can truly sense the ancient pulse of the town. Culturally, Monterosso is the undisputed culinary heavyweight of the coast. The local economy and identity are woven deeply into both the sea and the soil. The unique microclimate here, sheltered by the high mountains and warmed by the sea, is exceptionally fertile. Monterosso is famous across Italy for its sprawling, vibrant lemon groves. The sweet, sharp scent of citrus practically hangs in the air year-round, culminating in a massive annual lemon festival. Yet, the absolute stars of the local heritage are the Monterosso anchovies. This isn't just fishing, it is an art form. Local fishermen still utilize the lampara technique, heading out on moonless nights with incredibly bright lanterns mounted to their small wooden boats to attract the schools of fish. Once caught, the anchovies are meticulously cured in sea salt inside terracotta pots by the local women. A highly social, generational tradition. This centuries-old preservation method was once a strict matter of survival for the harsh winters. Today, it is fiercely protected and celebrated globally as a gourmet delicacy. When you experience Monterosso, you are witnessing the perfect complex collision of ancient Ligurian tradition, proud historical resilience, and modern resort luxury. It is a village that seamlessly offers the expansive comforts of a Mediterranean holiday, while fiercely protecting the deep, enduring soul of the Five Lands. For our final chapter, we have arrived at our fifth and central stop, Corniglia. As we walk into these shaded, impossibly narrow streets, the contrast to the other four villages is immediate and visually jarring. Corniglia is the absolute anomaly of the Cinque Terre. It is the only town not built directly on the water. Instead, it sits elevated on a steep, rocky promontory, perched nearly 100 metres above the Mediterranean Sea. This sheer elevation is the fundamental key to understanding Corniglia's history, its architecture, and its soul. To even reach the centre of this village from the train station below, visitors must conquer the Laderina, a massive zigzagging brick staircase consisting of 33 flights and nearly 400 steps. That physical barrier acts as both a historical and modern filter, because there is no harbour to dock the massive tourist ferries. And because of that gruelling climb, Corniglia inadvertently protects itself. It naturally repels the massive waves of casual day trippers that flood the coastal towns below. The village boasts ancient Roman roots, widely believed to be named after the gens Corniglia, the Roman family to whom this land originally belonged. From its very inception, Corniglia was an agricultural stronghold. The people here were historically farmers, not fishermen. They quite literally turned their backs to the sea and focused their entire existence on taming the earth. Because of this deep, enduring connection to the soil, even the architecture here feels fundamentally different. If you look closely at the buildings lining these tight alleys, you will notice they are generally shorter and wider than the towering vertical coastal fortresses of Vernazza or Riomaggiore. Instead, they closely resemble the rural inland farming villages tucked far away in the Ligurian mountains. For centuries, the locals have dedicated their lives to terracing the sheer cliffs that surround us, building an astonishing network of dry stone walls, known locally as muretti, a secco entirely by hand. This monumental, back-breaking human effort created a fertile sanctuary for olive groves, lemon trees, and sweeping vineyards. In fact, Corniglia's wine has been legendary for centuries.
My girlfriend would kill me if she let me.
Yeah, we didn't know that there.
It was so highly regarded for its quality that it was specifically praised in Giovanni Boccaccio's famous masterpiece of Italian literature, the Decameron, written all the way back in the 1350s.
Non ti sta bene.
Che teorica che me la va.
Non ce l'avevi poi fatto.
As a result of its isolating geography, walking through Corniglia today is the closest you can possibly get to experiencing the Cinque Terre as it existed a century ago. The pace of life here is noticeably slower. It is remarkably more authentic. The local culture remains fiercely protective of its quiet daily rhythms. As we wander past these small stone doorways, you are far more likely to smell wild rosemary, fresh basil, and lemon blossoms in the air than the commercial fryers of tourist restaurants. This village serves as a vital, breathing reminder that before this rugged coastline became a heavily trafficked UNESCO World Heritage Site, or a viral sensation, it was simply a collection of remote, incredibly hard-working farming communities.
Вы мне только вечером не бросаете, когда будете идти по лестнице?
Bon, et il doit m'attendre parce que je fais demi-tour.
Oui. Alors, moi je me suis dit, bon, c'est quelqu'un qui peut-être me prend pour
Non,
quelqu'un,
et
mais
après, j'essaie de rechercher votre nom, les pages, j'essaie de punaise, c'est quoi
incroyable.
Et moi, partout, par contre, moi,
Je suis pas très physionomiste.
Je vous ai pas vu, j'étais en train de regarder.
Malheureusement, je suis pas très physionomiste, vous m'excusez. Hein.
We are finishing our walk today by heading to the very edge of the promontory, stepping out onto the breathtaking panoramic terrace. Because Corniglia sits dead centre in the Cinque Terre and reaches so high into the sky. This belvedere offers a sweeping 180-degree view of the entire coastline. You can look out and see the jagged silhouettes of the other villages we have explored today. Corniglia truly represents the quiet, beating heart of the Five Lands. Standing up here, away from the chaos, looking out over the vast glittering expanse of the Mediterranean, it perfectly concludes our journey through the incredible history, resilience, and unparalleled beauty of the Cinque Terre.